What's next for Congress in bailing out the nation's financial industry? Hi, I'm Chris Casteel in the Washington Bureau of the Oklahoman. I'm here with Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole, a Republican from Moore. Congressman, thanks so much for coming in.
Good to be here.
It's been almost 24 hours since the big vote in the House yesterday, the bailout bill going down. I mean, the financial rescue bill going down.
I like your change of terminology.
What have the calls been like in your office? I know you guys were receiving a ton of calls last week. What have they been like since the vote?
Okay, before the vote, they were very heavily against. I mean, literally 13-1 against it. Since then, they're still opposed. But it's probably about 40%, 60%. We've had maybe 300-400 calls since the vote. So I think people are a little bit worried about what's next, even people that are still against the bill, although most of them, to be honest with you, don't know too much about the bill. They heard the original Paulson plan,
right,
but they didn't have a chance, frankly, to know about the changes that had come to the bill.
It all happened over the weekend.
Yeah,
right?
and when you're in a position to talk to them about what's the changes that have been made and why, I too was against the original bill, but this one, while it certainly isn't what I would have preferred, had been improved enough that given the financial situation we should vote for it. As they understand that, then they become more understanding of your position and more supportive. But there's no question it's put a strain on folks, and I don't know a single member whose calls have been in favor of this, and probably they're more dramatically opposed in Oklahoma, which is pretty conservative, than a lot of other places in the country.
You're a member of the House Republican leadership team, and all last week there were a lot of predictions that it would be House Republicans that would be the hardest group to sell this to. What do you think was the major resistance yesterday from, and what are there 2 or 3 things that they can do to this package to sell it to more House Republicans?
Well, I think House Republicans have a lot to be proud of because they made the bill, frankly, a lot better. And I think anybody would say we added taxpayer protections. We added the CEO caps. We added literally a private insurance component, which is where we ought to go, where these firms can pay into an insurance fund and protect themselves. So there was a lot of good improvement in the bill. It certainly wouldn't have been what I would have done, but it was still much, much better because of House Republicans held the line. I think the biggest problem was they didn't have enough time to talk to their constituents about the changes. And I also think that we didn't even have enough time as a leadership team to talk to all our membership about the changes. I think the movement was too fast. I, as you know, would have preferred starting on the Senate side where there really was bipartisan support for this. But, over time, I think we can do better given as people become more educated. And there are a couple things we could do. I would like to see us add an increase in the insurance and local banks from 100 to 250,000. FDIC insurance. I think that has a Main Street focused and thrust to it. It protects the little guy, the small business person, and it shows some concern. And we haven't adjusted those levels up in quite some time. They're nothing. They don't provide anything like the level of protection they did in an earlier period, given inflation. So I'm sure there'll be other ideas that surface, but the thing that I think Republicans need to think about, and conservatives, is that the Democrats could move this dramatically to the left. There's 94 of their members they weren't able to get the support of. Many of them are very liberal and thought this was too conservative a bill. Or Congress could do nothing, which I think would be really risky for the markets, both the stock market and the credit markets. If the economy deteriorates, we move into economic disaster. That probably helps the Democrats politically, and they'll be back here with a president and an emboldened majority. So Republicans, need to work hard to improve the bill. I think we did. But they also need to think at some point, if you don't reach a deal, then somebody else will make a deal, and it's not going to be a deal that you like. It'll be easy to oppose, but it'll actually become law. And I think the risk of that are very great. Last point, I think the real risk here, though, is not a political risk. It's just the risk to the people that we represent. I do remember the stories of my grandparents and my parents about the Great Depression. I did live through the 1980s in Oklahoma, where we saw real estate collapse and bank failures and what that meant for the broader economy. This is the kind of situation that if it gets out of hand, and it genuinely is global in scope.
Sure.
It's not just Wall Street at all, or even America. It's global. If it gets out of hand, then everybody's retirement is going to suffer either directly in their 401k or indirectly through their pension funds. Everybody's home value will fall, and that's usually the most important asset that most people have. If you have an active mortgage and you're struggling a little bit to make it now, it'll get worse. And your jobs are at risk, and college loans. That's a lot to gamble on, gee, I want the perfect plan. And whatever plan we have, again, I could have the perfect Tom Cole plan, but I've got to get 218 votes behind it, and it's going to have to come from both political parties. So we're not going to get to a plan that either side is going to be completely happy with.
Right. Obviously, after the vote yesterday, there are lots of partisan accusations on both sides about why the vote went down. Can the House still come together after that? And just
I think we have to. I think it's a real challenge to the institution and to the leaders. And I'm a pretty partisan guy, and my job is to run a campaign committee, this is the height of our partisan season. I don't think the barbs back and forth were very helpful yesterday. I don't think they were helpful on the floor. I don't think they were helpful in the aftermath. Pinning blame really doesn't matter, and I don't think the American people care much about that. They send us here to get things done. And they're beginning to understand there's a genuine crisis here. There's a genuine threat. It's the responsibility of Congress to act. The majority party is generally the one that takes the lead, but the Democrats are not in a position to do it. Obviously, we have a division between the executive branch and the Congress. This is about as difficult a time to do this and as difficult a sort of distribution of power situation to do this as we can have. So we need to show that we can rise above this and get something positive done, because at the end of the day, the people that we represent, whether they realize it or not today, are at great risk and will pay the consequences. We would know exactly what to do if this were another 9/11, because everybody would see it and expect us to act dramatically. We'd know what to do if this were another Katrina. But this is actually, I would argue, more threatening than either of those things, because it is genuinely global, potentially in scope, and it can be genuinely of a tremendously long duration. If things go wrong, we could have stagnation for a very long time. We could slide into a depression. We could be in a situation like the Japanese were for a decade of slow growth or no growth. And, as somebody sits on the House Armed Services Committee, I will tell you, these kind of things are not just economic. They have real political and military and diplomatic consequences. We should have learned that. Everybody's talking about the Great Depression in 1929 right now. That may or may not be an accurate statement. I think, as an old historian, about the 1930s. Hitler was a pretty marginal guy in German politics in 1929. 4 years later, in the midst of a Great Depression, he rises to the top of a great industrial power. There are going to be political consequences to a global downturn that will threaten American security, not just economically, but very directly when you think how unstable big parts of the world are. We're asking enough out of our men and women in uniform. We ought to be doing as much, not just for them in the fight, but to try and keep the world as stable and peaceful as we can, so they're not called upon to do the kinds of things that in a dangerous world they might be called on to do, or a more dangerous world.
Right. Congressman, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. Look for more on this story in the Oklahoman.